of Dirty Radio
This is
TV
Pastor Bruce
Social.
Wall. I want to welcome you to the Boston Praise.
Hello, this is Boston Praise Radio. I'm Jemai.
I'm Layla.
I'm Julisa.
And today we have a special guest that we're going to interview today. So would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, and thanks for having me. My name is Singer. I am the investigations editor for GBH News.
Okay, so today we're actually going to be interviewing you and asking some questions just about like what you do and why you do it and talking about some of your articles.
Mhm.
So the first question I have is, what inspired you to become an investigative reporter?
You know, my first boss, so I started my first newspaper when I was 10 years old. Like, it was pretty clear that journalism was going to be what I did. And I worked on the middle school television station. I worked in the high school newspaper. I went to college and worked on a college newspaper. And then I realized I had a degree in some liberal arts nonsense and all this journalism experience, so I became a reporter. But one of my first boss, who is still a very dear friend, you know, basically his whole mission was find out stuff that people didn't know yet. It's not enough to just repeat stuff you've already heard. Nobody wants to read that. Nobody wants to pay for that. Find out stuff people don't know. And so it became this whole thing. It's like, okay, how do you find out something that people don't know? So I have not been an investigative reporter my entire career, but I have been a reporter my entire career sent to find things people don't know, which is basically the root of where investigative reporting comes from.
Okay. Thank you.
My question is, when did you realize you wanted to be a reporter or saw this as a career for yourself?
You know, like I said, I started when I was a child being interested in it, but you know, when I was a child, you know, reporting was a hot thing. You know, Woodward and Bernstein were taking down the President of the United States. Right, that was cool. Reporters were cool. The career thing was a little different. I mean, there was a period of time when I was in high school and college, I thought, well, maybe I'll be involved in political activism. For a while, I thought I'd be an actor. I'd go into the theater. But it was ultimately, the thing about being a reporter is all you need is good questions. That's the whole skill. And the ability to write down the answers. And I'm just curious. Like, I like to ask people questions. Like, what do you do? Why are you here? What brought you? You know, for me, gathering that, it's just fun. When I realized I could do it for a living, it's sort of a bonus. It's like, woohoo. And people ask me, like, oh, what are you going to do when you retire? I'm like, when I retire, I'll ask people questions and report stories. It's just what I do. It's who I am. Does that help?
Yeah.
So, after you like report stuff or like post it, do like people like critique you on that or like criticize what you do?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. My goal is, when I write a story, and it's going to be critical of you for whatever reason, I've tried to reach you. I have spoken to you. You will not be surprised when you see what's in the story. You might be mad, but you won't be surprised. Now, sometimes you get criticism that's like, you misspelled my name, and then I'm embarrassed by that. Sometimes you get criticism like, you missed some key facts, and then that's a dispute or a discussion whether it's true. And then there's stuff where we just get stuff wrong. I mean, there are times I have been humiliated and embarrassed because I got stuff wrong. But yeah, one of the things we talk about in journalism is that when we make mistakes, we make them in public and everybody sees them. And everybody can then email us and tell us we made mistakes and yell at us for it. We get it all the time. But we also do get people calling us and saying, hey, that was a really good story. I really liked that. Oh, hey, thank you for doing that story. So the phone's open, and, you know, sometimes you're happy to get the call and sometimes you're not.
Okay. So another question I have for you is, how does investigative journalism bring awareness to situations?
Well, that's a good question. You know, we talk a lot about how the whole purpose of investigative reporting is to sort of shine light where it has not been previously shined. You know, to show people things they didn't know that mattered to them. So, like I just did a story, perhaps you guys have seen that we were just talking about with Pastor Wall and Ron Bell about the city giving away vacant lots in Dorchester to build affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
We asked the question, who used to own those lots? And we found some of the families used to own those lots, black families who basically lost them under very sort of racist housing policies in the 1970s and 80s. That investigation opens the door, we hope, to a broader conversation about what is owed to those families.
Mm-hmm.
That's what investigative reporting is supposed to do, is to bring a light into a dark area and to show people what's going on around them so that they are then more empowered to take control and make decisions.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any favorite moments or any favorite things you've reported that's your top favorite?
I'll tell you one favorite moment, but it's a little embarrassing. But again, it speaks to why I'm a reporter. When Hurricane Katrina leveled Louisiana, well, particularly leveled New Orleans, and keep in mind it wasn't the hurricane, it was the failed infrastructure, but nevertheless. I went down there, I spent a lot of time doing some reporting around there, and my bosses asked me a year later, because the federal government had given $100 and something billion to recovery in Louisiana.
Yeah.
$100 and something billion. And my bosses asked me to go down and just do a story about where that money had gone, because it should be fairly easy, right? I mean, you just get the receipts. Federal government's giving away money, where's the receipts? It turned out not to be easy at all, because nobody really knew where it was. And so I was chasing money around. I have this poster on my wall of like receipts that I had stapled up and reports from various organizations and all this stuff. Nobody was collecting it. And I couldn't make sense of it. It was just all over the place. And I went down to Louisiana and I met the guy who was running the emergency response for the state of Louisiana. And I told him, I'm struggling. I can't find this money. It's $100 billion. Where is it? I don't understand where it is. And he takes out this piece of paper. It's basically a napkin, effectively. And he says, here's why. And he drew on it the series of buckets. Here's where this money goes, and here's who gets it. Here's where this money goes, and here's who gets it. Here's where this money goes, and here's who gets it. And you can go into, you have to, what your struggle is, you haven't asked the right people. You got to go to this group, and this group, and ask for explanations of what's in the bucket. And he gave it to me, and I walked out. And I stood in the parking lot of this, it was an old abandoned department store that had been converted into an emergency response center. And I stood in the parking lot with this piece of paper with these 4 buckets drawn on there. And I was near tears. I was like, thank you, God, for giving me this. This is like the key to what I spent 4 months banging my head against the wall trying to learn this stuff, and nobody would open the door. And this guy just drew for me the treasure map. And it was one of those moments you're just like, the reporting works. You know, ask questions, and this is no matter what you choose to do when you leave this place. Ask questions until you get the answers that satisfy you.
What's like the hardest thing you reported, or
The hardest. There's, you know, hardest meaning difficult, or hardest meaning most sort of emotionally challenging?
I would say like emotionally, like
Well, there's been a lot, you know, I've been on scenes of some fairly horrific things. Talking to people who've lost family members is really, really hard. And I've also evolved as a reporter in some way that when I'm talking to somebody whose child has died, I want to tell the story because it's important to tell the story. But I also want to respect the family and their grief and what they're going through. And we believe, and I think it's true, that giving them the opportunity to tell the story is part of their grieving and it's important. But am I using them for my own purposes to get a story out? That's where you end up. So the past year and a half I've spent talking to people who've returned from prison about their experiences and about what the state could be doing better, the city could be doing better to help them reacclimate after they return from prison. But again, you get these questions where, do I need to have you retell your story and re-traumatize yourself by telling your story just so I can get a story out the door? I mean, I've sat in some very heavy conversations with people about time they have spent behind bars and what they went through. And I have to really think about, how do I respectfully tell their story without just using them?
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
So, like, I know, like, some people don't like being reported for that exact reason.
Right.
Like, oh, like, you're using me for whatever. So, like, how do you deal with that when, like, somebody, like, hesitates with, like...
A lot of it is you just have to build trust, and there's no way to do it other than to just keep showing up. You know, there are neighborhoods that I've wanted to report on that people were untrustful of me, distrustful of me, which is fair. There's no reason they should trust me. I'm just a white guy with a pad walking in, right? But I come back. I show up. I keep showing up. I do what I say I'm going to do. I'm there when I tell them to be there. I wait politely if they're not there. You just have to be a good member of their community to the point that they come to trust you. It may take a while. And they may not. I mean, ultimately they may say, I don't want to talk to you. And you have to accept that as well and respect that. Like, you know what? I can't fault you for that. I hope that you'll want to. I mean, the story I did about the vacant properties, I found a family who had been an owner of the properties, and they chose not to talk to me because it was just too painful to go back through. And I said, you know what? I get that. I can't fault you. I'm going to send you the story when it's done, and my phone lines are always open if you want to talk.
All right. Well, another question I have is like, I'm pretty sure like you've had doubts in the past about your reporting and like if it was going to go anywhere. So what pushed you to keep going and continue reporting stuff that you loved?
Yeah. There are certainly times. The thing about investigative reporting particularly is that sometimes you find yourself down this rabbit hole. And you're really like, I'm into this thing, I'm into this thing, I'm into this thing, and it's not really there. You know, you do have to be humble and recognize that you might be wrong. The same with the question about people calling and complaining. Yeah, you have to be humble and recognize you might be wrong. So sometimes you're in a story and you're just like, you know what? I thought there was something here and there really isn't, and I need to walk away from it and move on to something else. But there's also times when there's just this thing. This story about the properties, I did not know whether I'd be able to find these families, but I figured they had to be out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? We know there were families. We have their names. We should be able to find them somehow. And so when I finally got the first time I got one of them, I'm like, yes, score! I got a family. You just have to believe that if you resist the temptation to quit, that there will be a reward at the end of the journey.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
How did it make you feel once you finished this article, and how did it feel when you saw that everyone was reading it and noticed what you've done was a great thing?
It's cool. There's this funny story like this, which I've been working on for 6 months, off and on. Like I got other things I'm doing too. The funny thing about a story like this is that I was done a couple days before we were publishing it, and putting it on the radio as well. So I was done a couple days early. So there's these 2 or 3 or 4 plus a weekend. So like there's 3 or 4 days I'm just sitting there waiting. Those are the days you don't sleep because you're lying in bed and you're like, how many H's in Dorchester? Did I spell it wrong? I got to go back and look. Like that woman's name, did I get it right? I said there was 10 properties. Was it 11? I got to go back and recheck. So you're just sort of like second guessing everything in the story. Because then the story publishes and you stare at your phone, right? Waiting. waiting for Judge Alicia to call and to say, you made a mistake in paragraph 4 and there's 2 H's in Dorchester. You're like, ah! So then that doesn't happen. So that's good. And then you wait a little while longer and see, okay, is anybody reading it? And then you start to hear from people, hey, I like the story. Then you get to say, and then in this case, the women who were sort of the lead characters in my story, they called, and again, it was their family who had lost the property.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who made the time to talk to me. They're the ones who helped me tell the story. I was most concerned about them. How would they feel about seeing their family's name in the newspaper like this? And they called me and they said that they were proud to have participated. They were grateful for the story, and that they felt heard in a way they had not previously been heard. That, to me, is the only thing about the story that matters. I don't care if anybody else reads the story. I don't care if the city of Boston changes their policy because of the story. What matters to me is that these 3 women felt heard in a way they had not previously been heard, and to me, that is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, going more off that, like, what does this job do for you? Like, how does it make you feel?
Well, it depends on the day you ask that question. There are days I want to bang my head against the wall, like, ah! Yesterday was one of those days. There are very serious highs and lows, right? There are times, and my wife will tell you that after a story like this, about a week later, I'll be sitting around the house miserable because I believe I've gotten my last good story and I'll never have another good story, and I don't have a story I'm working on. I don't know what I'm working on. A story I was looking into fell through and I don't have anything, and I'm sad. Because these projects take a while, and finding a good story takes a while. And so there's these periods of just being like kind of depressed because you're not sure you'll ever get another good story.
Mm.
And then when you find a good story, you start chasing it. There's these periods, these great highs. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I got fish on the hook. So, and then there is, of course, the other thing to remind everybody, and no matter what job you ever get into, only a portion of your job is the job. The other portion of the job is the people you work with.
Yeah.
Which hopefully is the community, the team, the teammates, and the family that you go into battle with. But they sometimes are also your annoying cousin Bruce, who makes you insane half the time. And so a lot of the work involves navigating the personalities of the other people that you work with and the other requirements of your job. Like, oh, did you fill out the paperwork properly? Oh, did you get that thing done with oh, did you manage the recording system right? There's all these things that are just part of doing the job. I'm not faulting them for being that, right? But they can be truly annoying.
Mm-hmm. Well, going back to what you said about like finding stories and stuff and how difficult it is, it's kind of like us. Like, you know, when you run out of things to talk about and you got to figure out, okay, what are we going to talk about today and what are we going to do? Because like we feel like we've already talked about a lot of important stuff.
Right.
So.
Well, and by the way, I do suggest, because you're all students or have exposure or opportunity still to take classes, right? I highly suggest you take an improv class. Because a lot of what you will do in your life, even if it's not in journalism, you have to pretend that you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because stuff like that, like what happens when you run out of stories? Well, you better make one up because the newspaper's coming out tomorrow anyway, so you better have something, right?
Yeah.
So take an improv class because you have to learn how to pretend that you know what you're doing.
And like adjust.
And if you pretend long enough, sooner or later, fake it till you make it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sooner or later, you're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
So, but it is a thing. Like, what am I going to do next? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the question I have for you next is, so like, why did you write about the Welcome Home program and like that article? Like, what made you just say, oh, well, this topic is not really talked about, and I just figured this out. This what made you want to write about it?
Part of it is that I was in a office, an old office, an office that had gone back to the 1940s, and they were selling off all the stuff. Like the guy had died, and they were selling off all the stuff. And I went to buy a file drawer. And while I was there, they basically threw in as a gift this 1950 telephone directory of Boston, 1953. And I got some colleagues who've been in Boston that long, or their families have been anyway. And so I was like, hey, where you? And so we looked them up in this phone directory. We found them, and we found their addresses and their phone numbers. I go, wow, that's really cool. So when the Boston Welcome Home program came out, and they said we're giving away vacant properties to build housing, and somebody said, well, those houses were probably, those vacant properties were probably taken from black and brown people. I'm like, I've got a phone book that is organized by address. It's actually a reverse directory, so it's organized by address. So I can look up those addresses and I can figure out who used to own them. That was, for me, that's like the penny drop moment, like, aha! We can actually answer this question.
Yeah.
Were there, in fact, black and brown families that lost their homes?
Because of this, yeah.
Because of this. So, at that point, I was like, well, now it's just a question of doing the work.
Yeah.
Which, it was a ton of work.
Was there a lot of families that you like found, but like some they just don't want to be interviewed? Like,
there was one family I found that didn't want to be interviewed. There was, well, let me phrase that. There's one family I found that did want to be interviewed. There's one guy who told me he's not the family, and I got it wrong, but I'm certain that's not correct. And then there's a bunch of families I could not find,
yeah.
because this was 1970s
Yeah,
and
they
80s.
could have moved out.
They could have moved out. They may have fairly common names. You know, if there were, you know, a James Wilson, I don't know how many James Wilsons there might be, and I'm not sure I got the right one, and I'm not going to go through the list of 300 James Wilsons in Boston to try to find, you know. I got lucky that some of these names were unusual enough that I was able to track them down.
Okay.
So when teenagers and other kids read your story and read that you're a good reporter and stuff like that, and that inspires them to be a reporter themselves, what advice would you give them to encourage them to keep going?
The first piece of advice is a little weird, but it's true. You can be a journalist in your life where you are now. You can begin practicing the skills that you will need for this career now. In fact, right now, I'm sitting with 3 young people who are practicing the skills that could be useful to them if they want this career. Even though it may never go on your resume, even though it may never get published anywhere, even though whatever, you can be doing it. Because journalism is really just a basic set of skills. Can I ask good questions? Can I follow up with an answer that I want more information about? Am I persistent in my curiosity? And can I write it all down clearly and quickly and get it right? It's not magic. Those are skills you can begin practicing now. And because of the beauty of the internet, you can produce your own if you want and put it up on the internet. You could probably find some outlet that would have you. You know, there's a community newspaper maybe that needs someone to cover a hearing or a council meeting or the parade. Any opportunity to start doing it now, take the opportunity. Because I don't want to hire somebody who wants to be a reporter. I want to hire somebody who is a reporter in their heart and their soul and wants to come work for me to get better. So, my advice to you is if you want to be a reporter, be a reporter. Somebody will figure out a way to hire you for it. Other questions?
Oh, I thought you had another
No.
question. Well, you guys want to jump in? We're listening.
Girl, no, they're not a part of this.
But I have a question for you,
Oh.
which is, when you do a camp like this, is it because you're interested in pursuing journalism as a career, or is it because it's just sort of an interesting thing to do for a couple of weeks? What do you see as the takeaway and the value?
Like, while we first did it, or I first did it because someone just told me, like, my medical director told me about it because she's a member of the church. And like I just wanted a job for the summer.
Mhm.
I didn't actually think I was gonna be on the radio like he told you earlier. I didn't think I was gonna be on. I thought I was gonna be like background, maybe working on the mics or whatever. And like, I mean, now that I've been here for a couple weeks, it's fun, or it's fine. Like, you know, I'm kind of used to being on air now,
Mhm.
and it's like, it's okay to me. It's fun talking about topics and hearing what other people think about it, and like having little debates and stuff.
Well, and keep in mind also that it's very important to keep in mind that part of my background is I was a roadie for a bunch of years. I ran folk festivals, so I learned how to do that, and that's actually a pretty marketable skill also. So both sides of this table are careers you could pursue, whether it's on this side of the microphone or that side of the microphone. So just keep that in mind too.
Mm-hmm.
And what about you guys?
It was just something I'd never done before. Like, I've been asked to do this before, but I was just like, I don't know. And then, like, I was like, you know what, why not? I have nothing going on this summer, so I wanted to, like, be productive, I guess, and, like, do something that I've never done before. So.
And how has it turned out for you? Are you proud of what you've done so far, or do you feel like it hasn't been worth your time?
Honestly, when I've heard that, like, people have been watching, I was like, oh, people actually do watch this. I was like, oh, okay. I don't know, like, it just, I guess it makes me happy because, like, they like what I'm saying, I guess, and, like, they're proud of me. So I'm like, okay, like, this has purpose. So, yeah. It's pretty nice.
Yeah. And you?
For me, someone did tell me about this, and it did seem fun. And I am used to being on podcasts with my sister and stuff, like talking about life and stuff. So I felt like this would be fun for me and learning new things about the radio. So
Yeah. Now I'll tell you. So when I was in middle school, it was a very strange school. It was built, it was brand new, so it had all these facilities, but it was built in an attempt to integrate some very disparate communities, and it didn't work very well. It became a pretty violent place. We had race riots in my school. But I started to work for they had a TV studio, so I had to work for the TV studio. And what we did is we did a TV show in-house, and we would roll TVs into classrooms, and so people could watch a movie with a little bit of our local Reisenstein Middle School television.
Mm.
So I was basically the TV guy. So I'd walk through the building, you know, and people were like, hey, you're on TV. I'm like, yeah, but it's filmed down the hall. Like, it's not like, but just being inside the box sort of gives you this weird power.
Yeah.
And it's still true in America, strangely, that being on TV gives you a kind of authority. People think you must know stuff.
Yeah.
They might, you know, and so people would like when I was on TV as a reporter, you know, every now and then, like family members go, oh, you tell me about, you know, I'm trying to buy a car. What do you think about this deal? I'm like, I don't know anything about cars. Like, yeah, but you've been on TV. You must know stuff.
Yeah.
You know, you could make an argument. That's you know, how you become a politician. No names necessary, right? Being in this field, as you said, people see you and they respond. And suddenly it's like, oh, I'm not just talking into a well. I'm talking to an audience. That gets really, and then you start to think, what is my responsibility to that audience? Like, what do they want? That's when you know you sort of made the transition, like, okay, now I'm doing this right. Because I'm no longer thinking about what I want to do. I'm thinking about what does my audience want to hear that I can help them learn.
I think that's also, like, what I'm, like, learning a bit now, like, because when people say that they watch me or whatever, I don't really, like, get, like, what they would like to see or whatever, like.
Ask them.
You know what? I should. Yeah, I should ask them.
Ask them. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that news particularly does not do well and has not done well for decades is go to communities and ask them what kind of stories they're interested in hearing or seeing, or what they should be writing about, or what. And I've been trying to do more of that now. My Life After Prison series was basically, I just went and hung out with returning citizens and asked them, what are the stories? We invited them over. We had a whiteboard on our wall. We invited them over to just write the ideas on the whiteboard about the things that are challenging or important or successes 4 people returning from prison. I don't know. I haven't returned from prison. And we let them tell us what they wanted to read about. And that's what we wrote. So, but it's hard and it's a little untraditional. But you can absolutely ask your audience, what do you want to know?
Yeah.
I heard from somebody that you aren't registered to vote, so
Me?
or vote, yeah. So,
Yeah.
what's your opinion or thoughts about that?
Ron Bell's been talking about me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so for starters, I was a reporter in Washington for 3 decades.
Yeah.
You've
been everywhere.
I've been everywhere. Yeah. I was the political editor for one of the biggest newspapers in the country. I, at one point, traveled with one of the presidential campaigns, covering the campaign. It was my job to know and tell stories about these politicians that people were voting for all the time. It did not seem to me the right thing to do to vote, because I'm not choosing the politicians I'm going to cover. And I'm not going to have a commitment to any of these politicians that I can't write about you because I wrote about, because I voted for you, right? There is one exception to that rule, which is when I was living in Washington, D.C., which is a 90% Democratic city. I voted for Barack Obama because it didn't matter. Like D.C. was going to vote for Barack Obama. My vote didn't matter, but I wanted to. But it was a moment I thought, this is a historic moment. And then the second, time I voted was because I had moved out of Washington and I was no longer covering national politics. It was not my world. I don't write about the president. But there was a person running for president who had expressed a loathing for journalists and what we do. And I voted against that person because the First Amendment pretty much requires me to protect it.
Yeah.
But in general, I don't vote. Particularly, I don't vote in races where I am involved. So I won't vote in any of the city elections because I cover the city now.
Yeah.
And my job is to be sort of an unbiased
opinion.
Yeah, an unbiased judge. You don't want the umpire betting on the Pirates. You want the umpire to watch the Pirates play and call balls and strikes. Now, it's very controversial. There are a bunch of other reporters who tell you this is nonsense, that we are still citizens, that we should still cast our votes and whatever else, and I can accept that.
Well, have you ever reported for someone a politician, like you said, or against any campaigns or anything, and they've said to you personally, so am I getting a vote? Have you ever had that?
Oh yeah. Well, among other things. Well, first of all, they're like, who are you working for?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not working for anybody. Yeah, well, you're voting for the other guy. I'm not voting for the other guy. I'm not voting for anybody. And then there's you want to do a good story about a politician. Oh, great. So you're with us. I'm not with anybody. And that for me, that is very, very, very. I don't donate. I don't sign my name to things for the same reasons. It's just I'm not. God bless you. If you come knock on my door for any candidate, any campaign, any issue, I'm going to welcome you. Ask you if you need to use the bathroom or get a drink of water because this is a hard job and you're out knocking on doors. I respect that, but I'm not going to sign anything and I'm not going to give any money.
Yeah, it's a hard thing.
Now, it also gives me an excuse, right? People are oh, can you? Nope, I'm a reporter. I don't join.
Yeah.
Not a joiner.
So you don't have to really be into the debates of who's better, who's this, yeah.
No, I hopefully my I will say that one of the things that Trump has done that has changed the dynamic here is that we used to be able to cover these candidates and it's not just Trump, by the way. I should correct that. It's not just Trump, but Trump has sort of taken it to the next level. We used to be able to cover these candidates because, this person's policy and that person's policy are different, and how would, this person serve the community better than that person? And we were able to do those things in a fairly you know, dispassionate way where, you know, okay, you know, Pastor Wall wants to spend it on the buses, and Pastor Hobbs wants to spend it on the police, and we can discuss which of those ideas is better. What has changed is that, you know, Pastor Wall is now calling Pastor Hobbs a communist who hates America, and questioning, you know, and questioning the pastor's parentage, and how, what are we supposed to do about that?
Yeah, actually, like seeing something like that on TikTok, it was like debates. They were talking about presidential debates. It was like debates back then versus now, because I think they were like just saying how like even back then they had more respect for each other. They weren't going for each other's personal lives. They were talking about the subject on hand. They were talking about what would they do when they're the president. And now it's just more of like a, I'm going to get you where it hurts. I'm going to get you where it hurts. I'm going to go into your business and this and that. It's like, it's a joke now.
The other thing that's changed, and I don't know where to put this, I don't know why. There's probably some research to be done. And actually this is in the pastor's wheelhouse, not mine, is when I was growing up, there was a concept called shame. You could be ashamed of what you had done. And when you were ashamed of what you had done, you then stepped back, you reconsidered, you thought about your behavior, you tried to rebuild trust with people. It was a really interesting and useful concept, which we don't have anymore. And so now, when you do something that we think should be shameful, you just declare that it's a lie, that you didn't do it, that there's nothing to be ashamed of, and that your friends still like you anyway, so bite me.
Yeah.
And it's just one of these things where, as a political reporter at the time, I figured, well, if I found out that you were, I don't know, spending the taxpayers' money on liquor and women, you'd be ashamed and you'd quit your job. That's not what happened. What happened was I found some of those. And what happened is that you declared it was a political attack by your enemies, and your friends would rally around you and you get reelected because it was all fake news. And I was just like, okay, well, this job is no longer satisfying to me because we have lost the concept of shame. And I don't know what to do about that. And I think, Pastor, you have to work on that. Because if people cannot be ashamed of their wrongdoings and ask for repentance and get it, where are we supposed to start?
Yeah.
Like, if no one's going to repent, if no one's going to apologize, if we do away with the notion of shame,
when is it going to end?
Where's it going to end?
Yeah.
Do you ever have like people who like, I don't know, like I've seen stuff on TV where like reporters always get like random people knocking on their doors like report this. Like people don't do that to you. Like
they don't knock on my door, but yeah, we get it all the time. We get phone calls, we get emails. This thing happened. You should look into it. And we try to be as respectful of those things as possible. I mean, I try not to dismiss them, because you never know. Like, you may be onto something. It might be a story we could pursue. I may not have time for it, and I can say that to your face and say, "This is interesting, but I don't have time," or "It's not my department," or "It's not the sort of thing." I try to at least hear you, because everybody has a right to be heard.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to promise stuff. I will tell you that there's a guy. I was running a bureau in Ohio, and this guy calls me and says, "Oh, I don't want to use my name." Okay, I'll call you Mr. X. Oh, okay, so the state is sending mental patients on buses to go get therapy elsewhere. I'm like, okay, Mr. X, that's kind of interesting. How do we know this? It's because I'm one of the patients. Like, well, do you have any proof of that? I do. I've got some paper. It's got my name on it. I'm going to erase my name. Can I meet you somewhere? Sure. So I met Mr. X at the bus station. I still don't know Mr. X's name. We broke the story that the state was having difficulty finding staff to give mental health care in the big cities. And so it was telling all the mental health patients in the big cities to take these buses, giving them tickets, take buses to rural areas in the state to go get mental health care and then come back, which was kind of dumb and kind of ludicrous. And we could prove it. And Mr. X and I stayed in touch for a couple of years, and he provided some other materials that ended up being stories. I still don't know Mr. X's name.
Wow.
Of course, I couldn't find him either. Like, if I was looking for him, my only real thing was to go to the bus station and hope he showed up, because I started to get to know what his schedule was.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't get his phone number or whatever. So
So you only knew his face.
I knew his face. I knew his voice. He'd
Mhm.
call. I knew what he sounded like.
That's cool. It's kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of cool how you can get stories without even knowing the person's name or where they came from.
If the facts are true,
Then,
I don't need your name.
yeah.
I mean, I want your name, obviously. It helps me prove stuff. It helps me know that you're serious and a real person, not making it up. But if the documentation is there, and it was in this case, it was totally true. And so this is back in the day when phones were connected to the offices. There was like everybody's phone rang at the same time, and you pick up the phone and it's like, oh yeah, it's for Joe, there's Max is on the phone for you. Okay. I'd get, Singer, Mr. X is holding on line 1. Okay.
So do you like after you're done reporting or investigating people, like do you like maintain like relationships with them or
More so now. But yeah, I mean, there's people, more so now because I'm spending so much time in the community now.
Yeah.
Some of these folks are becoming friends, which I used to tell you would have been inappropriate for a reporter. You don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that anymore. I believe that as we are becoming more committed to our communities, we're going to make friends in those communities, and that's okay. That's important. It's important that they understand that we're human too and that we like them,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay that we can share, and it's not a one-way street. So some of the people who I have been reporting on now, I think it's fair to say we become friends.
I don't think we've asked you this, but did you did you grow up here in Massachusetts? Oh.
Born and raised in Pittsburgh.
Oh.
Moved to D.C. when I was a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and then more or less lived in D.C. with broken periods of
Mhm.
occasional for decades, and moved to Boston in 2018
wow.
because covering national politics was no longer meaningful to me.
Yeah.
And so I was going to either quit my job and to go into PR or go someplace else to do something else.
Mhm.
And this job just sort of floated across my desk to run an investigations unit at a local news
Mhm.
station. I'm like, count me in.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I had never really, I'd been to Boston a couple times. I had never had any roots in Boston and never
Yeah.
had a particular yen to come to Boston. And I moved here and I discovered that I liked it. And so my wife then decided to come move up here with me.
Mm-hmm.
And now we live here and we're feeling Bostonians. I'll tell you, the most Boston thing I've done is that a couple of days ago, a friend of mine saw my story online, and he texted me and he said, "Hey, great story. Can't wait. Next time you're out in the Bay Area, swing by. I'd love to have a cup of coffee."
Mm-hmm.
And I replied to him, "What do you mean? I'm in the Bay Area, the Dorchester Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
Take that." So I'm like, "Right, I live here now, right?
Yeah.
I'm now Boston. I'm in the Bay Area."
Well, is there any other questions that anyone wants to ask before we end?
What area of Boston do you live in? If you
Dorchester.
Dorchester?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're familiar with
Rock hard.
like the area and stuff, right?
I'm becoming more familiar. I still get lost. Like driving around, I get lost. I still can't figure out, why it is that Blue Hill and Bowdoin and Geneva connect the way they don't connect, and then you get lost going around.
I always say Boston is just a circle. No, not even Boston in general. It's a circle with just little shortcuts.
Yeah.
It's like you could go in one place and end up in a place you're already familiar with.
Yeah.
So it's like.
Yeah. So, and I've only lived in Dorchester now for about a year and a half. I was living downtown for a while, so I'm still learning the area. But I'm getting, and this story with the vacant lots has me driving all over. Particularly Bowdoin, Geneva, and Four Quarters, trying to sort of learn more about the city. So
Yeah.
I'm learning. I'm learning.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think that's time. We got about 40 minutes of this. So, well, thank you for coming in and having us interview.
Thank you for having
me. It was
me.
nice meeting you.
It was nice to meet
and
you.
learning some of
Thank
these
you.
topics.
And stay in touch. I mean,
Yeah.
I will say that I work for GBH News, but GBH News is part of the WGBH Educational Foundation. That is our title. That's what the foundation officially is known as. So educational is in my paycheck. So I am very sincere that if I could ever be of any use to you in your education,
Mhm.
you reach out to me, and I'm happy to do it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys also for watching. We'll be back on Tuesday at 12 o'clock. Tune in to Boston Braves Radio on TV. Bye.
Bye.
Aye. Thank you. That was a really good job.